Welcome back to 60-second stats, statistics in 5 minutes or less. Though to be fair, we may go a few minutes over on this one because it's a pretty heady topic. Welcome to Chapter 1, Video 3, Qualitative Variables versus Quantitative Variables. Let's get started. In order to talk about qualitative and quantitative variables, we need to understand what a variable even is. So, variables are the characteristics of the individuals within the population. For example, hair color. If our population is, let's say, students at post-university, well, one characteristic we could use to describe those students is hair color. Of course, the reason variables are called variables is because they vary. Consider the variable height. If all individuals had the same height, then obtaining the height of one individual would be sufficient in knowing the heights of all individuals. Right? If everybody was 5'2" like me, well, then all we would need to do is know my height and we would know everybody's height. But of course, that's not the case. We know that lots of people have different heights that are not 5 feet 2 inches. There's variability there, right? So height is a variable. As researchers, we wish to identify the factors that influence variability, and this is a really big aspect of statistics. So in this course, we're going to talk about two main types of variables, qualitative variables and quantitative variables. And to give you a brief definition of each of those, a qualitative variable, which is also called a categorical variable, allows for classification of individuals based on some quality, attribute, category, or characteristic. So think qualitative, quality. Some examples are eye color, right? That's a quality that describes somebody. Gender. Breed of dog. If our population was dogs, the breed would be a variable. Level of education, sophomore, freshman, junior, senior. Marital status, married, divorced, widowed, not married, single, things like that. They are qualities, attributes, categories, or characteristics. Whereas a quantitative variable provides numerical measures of individuals. The values of a quantitative variable can be added or subtracted and provide meaningful results. So quantitative, think quantity, number of students in a class, number of square feet in a house, population size of a city, age of an individual, height of an individual. These are all meaningful numbers. And we'll talk more about these in a minute. So let's break these down a little bit more. So qualitative or categorical variables allow for that classification, right, that we talked about. So when we're thinking about the question we're considering, ask ourselves, will the answer given by an individual be something other than a number? So for example, if we were doing a survey and asking people, what is your name? Will the answer that the person gives be something other than a number? And in that instance, yes, it would be. They would give you their name, right? Which means it's a qualitative variable. If it's something other than a number, then it's qualitative. Some examples are names, colors, yes, no answers. Don't let this confuse you. So for example, if we were doing a statistical study about the effects of smoking, are you a smoker or a non-smoker, right? Are you a smoker? Yes or no. Gender, nation of origin, state of residence, just a few examples. But what if the answer given by an individual is a number, right? So what if we ask a question for our statistical study and the answer that the individual gives us is a number? Well, then we need to ask ourselves, does performing an arithmetic operation on the number give me a meaningful answer? If no, then the data is still qualitative. So for example, a zip code, right? My zip code is 06483, but later I'll be moving to Simsbury later this month, so my zip code will change to 06070. Well, if I add or subtract those zip codes, does it give me any sort of meaningful value? No. So it's qualitative. However, if I did add or subtract those values and it gave me something meaningful, then we're talking about a quantitative variable. So let's talk about those a little bit more. Now let's talk about quantitative variables. And when we think quantitative, we think quantity, number, right? These are number variables. They're numerical measures. But the big thing we need to remember is that we can perform operations on them to provide meaningful results. So for example, temperature. Well, that's a number, so we should be thinking quantitative. Well, we also need to consider if we add or subtract these values, will we get a meaningful result? For example, if on Monday it was 98 degrees and on Tuesday it was 101, if we subtract those values, we get 3 degrees. Is that meaningful? It sure is. It means that on Tuesday the temperature was 3 degrees warmer than on Monday. It's a meaningful result we can interpret. Let's look at another example. The number of days in the past week that a college student has studied. Again, it's a number, so we're thinking quantitative, but let's decide if it's meaningful. Well, if Alex studied 3 days and Julie studied 6, if we subtract those values, we get 3 days. Is that meaningful? Yes, it is. It means that Julie studied 3 more days this week than Alec, so it must be quantitative. Here's just a visual definition showing you different types of qualitative data and quantitative data. You can pause the video and take a look. So let's apply what we've learned about quantitative and qualitative variables to see if we can distinguish between the two. So let's classify each of the following variables considered in a study on eating habits as qualitative or quantitative. So the first variable is nationality. Well, I know nationality. If I ask someone their nationality, they're not going to give me a number. So that one's definitely qualitative. Number of children. That's a numerical value. If I perform operations on it, is it meaningful? Well, yeah, right? If I have 3 children and you have 2, 3 minus 2 is 1, which means I have 1 more child than you. That makes it quantitative. A meaningful number. Household income in the previous year. Again, that's going to be a number. If I perform an operation on it, will it give me a meaningful value? Yeah, it will, right? If you make $100,000 a year and I make $50,000 a year, I subtract those two values and find that you make $50,000 more than I do. That's a meaningful value. And it's a number, so it's quantitative. Level of education, right? Freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Well, if I ask you your level of education, you're not giving me a number, so that's qualitative. And finally, daily intake of whole grains measured in grams per day. If I ate 10 grams of whole grains and you ate 20, you've eaten double the amount of whole grains as I have. So that's a meaningful number. That would make it quantitative. To sum it up, qualitative or categorical variables are qualities, attributes, categories, and characteristics. They're typically not numbers. However, don't get tricked. Some qualitative or categorical variables are numbers. We can do a quick test to decide whether or not they're qualitative or quantitative by asking us, do they provide meaningful values when operations are performed? So for example, if we add or subtract 2 of those numbers, do we get a meaningful value? If we don't, it's qualitative. If we do, however, it's quantitative. And quantitative variables typically are numerical values that when we do perform operations, they provide meaningful values. You're definitely going to want to practice this, so make sure you check out this Kahoot and practice this in a fun way. Reach out with questions. Bye!